This is Leaders in Finance, a podcast where we find out more about the people behind a successful career. We speak with the leaders of today and tomorrow to discuss their motivations, their organizations, and their personal lives. Why? Because the financial sector could use a little more honest conversation. Our guest this episode is the CEO of a large bank and has extensive experience in the financial sector. No one has the one key to success, but our guest can certainly share a piece of it.
Part of being successful is also being disciplined, habitizing certain things, which often also makes it much easier to keep yourself honest.
He hardly ever succumbs to fear by controlling what he can control and letting go of the rest. So, does nothing scare him?
Your vulnerability is often in your children, because if I think about fear, it's not even so much for myself, it's more in the ones that I really love.
And who's his biggest hero?
Roger Federer, a part of being incredibly talented, gifted. He's such a pleasant person. How he looks at competition, for example, his competitors, they're friends.
Our guest this episode is Vincent Goedegebuure, CEO of NatWest Europe. Your host is Jeroen Broekema.
Welcome to a new episode of Leaders in Finance. This week's guest is Vincent Goedegebuure, the CEO of NatWest Europe. Welcome, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy you are here and to be our guest at Leaders in Finance. And before I introduce you, I would like to thank the partners of Leaders in Finance for their ongoing support. They are Kayak, EY, MeDirect, and Roland Berger. We're very grateful to our partners. Now let's move on to my guest, and as a tradition, I'll start by spelling out the name of the guest, which is quite a long one today. So Vincent is Vincent, and then last name Goedegebuure, which is Goedegebuure. Vincent has been CEO at NatWest Europe since May 2022. He began his career as tax advisor at PwC Netherlands in 1997. After having worked at Citigroup in London and New York, he joined ABN AMRO in 2005. There he held various leadership positions, including head of global markets within the corporate and institutional banking division. His last position at ABN AMRO was global head client coverage within CIB. Regarding his education, Vincent earned his bachelor's degree in economics at the University of Groningen. He also completed an MBA at IESE, if I pronounce it correctly.
Yes, you do.
Do I?
Yeah, IESE.
IESE Business School, and studied law for 1 year at Queen's University. He's 52 years old and is married and has 2 children and lives in Amsterdam. That is a short introduction about your life and a little bit about your personal life as well. And as listeners know, I love to start by understanding what the organization you represent, NatWest, really is by using stakeholder approach. So maybe first we could start with customers and clients. And obviously you have NatWest Europe, which you cover, and then you have NatWest Global, which is a huge company. So maybe you can tell us a bit about both every time. Or at least a couple, and definitely with the one on clients. So could you tell me more about the customers of NatWest?
Yeah, no, I will do so. And thank you, Jeroen, also for this opportunity. So if you look at NatWest Group, one of the bigger banks in the UK, very much a high street bank, 60,000 people, almost 20 million customers. Everyone who has been to the UK, you see it basically on every corner of the street. It's very visible in the UK market. And in Europe, we focus on what we call the sort of top segment of the CIB market, corporate and institutional banking. So we focus on the large corporates in continental Europe. We also focus on funds and sponsors. And we focus on what we call FIG customers, FIs, within that specific space. For the ones of you who have been longer around, NatWest is a former RBS. And actually, RBS acquired ABN AMRO in 2008. Quite interesting, actually, is that the entity I'm leading out on in continental Europe is still operating under the former ABN AMRO license. So the customers that we are doing, it's incredibly focused, large corporates, funds and sponsors, and FIC. And we do that through the Amsterdam office, where I'm based. But we also have offices in Luxembourg, in Germany, in France, in Sweden, and in Italy.
Right. And the other stakeholder colleagues, like with how many people do you serve? Do you serve the customer base in Europe?
Yeah, so in Europe, we have spread out over the 6 different offices. We have around 500 people. Obviously, we tap very much into our mothership, into the nucleus in the UK. And so if we deal with our customers, it's also often through teams that are being sourced from the different European locations, but also with our colleagues from the UK. So it feels that we have much more bandwidth than just the 500 colleagues that we have on the ground in continental Europe.
Yeah, I can imagine. And maybe combining these two customers, like if you are serving a customer, how often is it, really a, for example, Dutch customer? Or is it for the largest part customers from the US or the UK that also go to continental Europe and then you serve them?
Yeah, so that's you're probably referring to inbound and outbound customers. I think for NatWest in Europe, it's really important that we also have our edge. We have our USP. And with the majority of our customers in continental Europe, we very much also focus on the UK nexus. What are the operations that a European large corporate has in the UK? Because then we can add something special to them. We can add our UK expertise. We can bring the whole bank to our European customers through the operations that they also have in the UK. So we believe that our sweet spot customer is with a UK nexus. So that could be a European company having operations in the UK, but it could also be an outbound company going from the UK into continental Europe. And that's where we actually want to be relevant for our customer base.
Yeah, because when are you most relevant? Like what is a reason that a large corporate starts to work with you and not, for example, with a local bank here?
So we have a couple of things where we believe we really add value. So that's very much on the capital market side. So corporates, but also banks, sponsors with a big funding program where they need to tap into the institutional market, we are there for them. We have a very much a stronghold around capital or around climate and ESG. And that can be through the capital market issuances, but also all kind of advisory services. We have a very strong platform on trading, both on the FX side, but also on the rate side, on the derivative side. And then also within continental Europe, we have a strong presence on structured finance. So that can be project finance, that can be leverage finance. And that's how we are relevant for our customers in continental Europe. As I refer to these customers having presences in the UK, we can be relevant through all other kind of products. So that could be sort of more the plain vanilla products like cash management, transaction banking, trade and guarantees. So that's how we bring the whole bank to our customers. And the majority of the customers that we service are incredibly international. So they have syndicates of over 10 banks, over 20 different banks, with banks that are more in the domestic bucket or in the local bucket, with banks that are more like in the sort of the American bucket, but also the bucket of international and UK banks. And we are one of these banks that very much fit into that specific bucket.
This is helpful. Thanks a lot. Moving on to another stakeholder, the regulator. Just before we started, you told me that you are operating under the European Central Bank directly, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So, and this is all public information. You can read it in our annual accounts. So as a European entity, we are 100% subsidiary of the NatWest Group. 1st of January last year, 2024, we moved to ECB supervision, also because we reached the 30 billion threshold, which the ECB often uses as an indicator to go to ECB supervision. So we've been now in that journey for year number 2. But there was clearly also some institutional knowledge, because when all European banks in 2014 moved to ECB supervision, the RBS, the former RBS, the former NatWest, the entity that I'm leading at, had also been moved to the ECB supervision. Then we became a little bit smaller, and as of 2016, 2017, we moved back to the NCA, so to the DNB. But sometimes that goes in banking. You become a bit bigger, you became a bit smaller. But over the last years, given also our growth trajectory, we've been moved to ECB supervision again.
Is it very different?
I think in a way, some things are very similar. Sometimes people really want to look for the differences between regulators, but in a way, regulators across the globe, they have a different way of or a similar way of interacting. If you look at the ECB compared to the DNB, it's the same type of regulation that we are being held accountable for. So there's actually, in that sense, not a big difference. I think the main difference could be a little bit when it comes to intensity. The ECB is an institution that is incredibly thorough, is incredibly on top of things. I would say they have quite some thematic reviews that they apply to the whole industry. So the industry is going, as we speak, through stress testing. That's every other 2 years. That's quite an intense process. We also believe it's a process that is helping us because it also makes sure that, well, we have obviously our own stress testing, but being kept honest through a regulator, being compared to your peers is actually also a really good thing. So I would say there are a lot of commonalities between regulators, and the ECB has sometimes a little bit of different focus areas or specifics that they find important.
And in terms of time, do you spend a lot of time on dealing with the relationships and all the stuff you need to do for the regulator yourself?
Yes, I clearly have my meetings with the regulator. I'm also supported by an incredibly strong team. I think all people within banking, they have to deal with regulatory obligations. It's not just a license to operate, it's also a license to grow. But I would say that I spend a fair amount of my time with the regulator, or if it's not with the regulator, at least making sure that in working with my teams, that we are also reg compliant, both in letter and in spirit of what the regulator expects from us.
Right. Another group of, I would say, one stakeholder, but it's basically a group, is competition. So if you take the angle of a Dutch large corporate, like who are competing to deal with that customer, who are the ones that want to build that relationship and have them as their client? Like, what do you see as your competition? Is it local banks, international banks, others?
It's all of the above, Jeroen, all of the above. And I get this question quite often because this is a question that I get when I'm interacting or operating in a Dutch context. I get a similar question when I'm in a German context or when I'm in Milan with my colleagues. So it's going back to these three different sort of buckets. It's like the domestic champions, it's the international banks, and it's more the Anglo-Saxon American banks. And then actually for some of the products, there are also the boutiques, there are the new entrants. So the competition is quite fierce. It's also like a big universe. I would say though that the type of customers that we are dealing with, there's also room for quite some banks. So it's not just that our customers need one or two banks. They probably need 1, 2, 3, or 4 banks on a specific product. But a syndicate often consists of many more.
Yeah, so it feels like fierce competition, and at the same time, you work a lot together in those syndicates, and all those companies have multiple banks, as you said. But ultimately, like, what's the number one competitor from perspective of a global footprint bank that you are? What would you mention? Like 1 or 2?
I find it incredibly difficult. In a UK context, you have a couple of UK champions like ourselves. So it's Lloyds, it's Barclays. I would say from an international perspective that there's not a single other institution that I would call out as someone who is like us or that we consider to be our main competitor. And actually, I also like to sort of more coming from a place of strength, because if we start to talk about competitors or you compare yourself too much towards others, I think that is probably not something how I would address it. I rather start from, okay, what are our own strengths? What is our sort of source of good that we're bringing to our customers? And I truly believe with the focusedness and the nimbleness that we have, particularly in Europe, we bring something important, added value, and relevant to our customers.
Yeah, because earlier in this conversation, you told me the different areas where you're specifically really good at, and one of them is ESG, everything around ESG. Is that purely because there's a lot of business to do there, or is there also a more moral moral reason why you're there?
Well, I would say both. I don't think that we feel a moral obligation necessarily on climate and ESG. I think we feel a moral obligation towards like all things that are sort of relevant for society and where we as an institution, as a bank, can play a specific role. So when it comes to climate and ESG, we can play a specific role as a financial institution in making sure that the money flows to the things where we believe that we can make a difference on climate and ESG. We very much believe that in our basically embedded and institutional expertise around regulation, and climate and ESG is heavily regulated, although there was a bit of tailwind coming out of the ECB with some relaxation around CSRD most recently. But with that sort of trained muscle on really trying and having the capability of understanding regulation, that is also a way how we can add value when it comes to climate and ESG, when it comes to EU taxonomy, when it comes to sort of interpretation that you give, is that we can really support our customers. So we very much feel that we as an institution have a role to play in the transition. If you were to look a little bit more on where is the opportunity, climate and ESG and all spend that we will see in that specific area, it's going to be gigantic over the next decades, and it has already been quite impressive. So if you see where most of the financing is being needed, if you look where we need advisory services, if you look at our role where we can also bridge a little bit between institutional money going to specific programs, I think that's where we can play a role. So from that perspective, it's also a profit pool. So whether you're a capitalist or whether you are more coming in from more a moral point of view, as you were just referring to, I think it can serve us both. But we as a bank have a big role to play here.
Yeah, makes sense. And obviously you're well aware of everything that's happening politically, geopolitically speaking. And you said there's so much money going into this direction. Is this what we all hear right now? Is that all kind of, on the sidelines? Is the ultimate, the trends are towards a certain direction? Or is there also, in the end, going less money into, for example, climate change financing?
Well, there's obviously a lot of rhetoric coming from the West, out of the US. My personal belief is that, this is a very imminent issue for the world. This is something, whether we like it or not, I think we really need to come together as a society, basically as a united sort of global nation, as a world. And a lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of technology, a lot of R&D is necessary, to help the world going through this transition. So I personally believe that continuous investment that is being required, that will continue to be there. Maybe we need to do a little bit of a different approach when it comes to labeling some of the things or towards the framing. I think that's where maybe in certain parts of the world or with certain people, some things may have a little bit lost in translation. So I think it's more a labeling, it's more a framing thing than anything else, because I think the necessity of making these investments and really focusing on this for the next couple of decades, I think that is not something which is going to change.
You're listening to Leaders in Finance with Jeroen Broekema.
I'm just curious. I said in my introduction, May 2022, you got into this role. How different has it been since then? Was it very different from your career before?
Well, in a way, banking is banking. For the last 20 years or so, I've been working in banking. I've been doing that out of Amsterdam for the majority of my working life, but I've also been based in London, in New York, as you referred to in the intro. And now I'm doing that for a UK bank, being based in Amsterdam, not being based in the mothership, which had been different compared to my previous 17 years when I was with ABN AMRO. So the things that are in a way the same as it was in my previous banking life is same type of customers, same type of products, same type of dynamics. But today I'm working in an office which is in another region than where the mothership is. It's much more international from my perspective. Working with many colleagues across 6 different locations in Europe. Only in the Amsterdam office where I'm based, although I'm traveling quite a bit. But only in the Amsterdam office we have over 30 different nationalities. And obviously, there's a big UK component, which I actually very much appreciate and like.
Yeah, but you could also say that you have even more responsibility now, and on top of that, you're much more an external figure now, given you're running this business for Europe.
Yes, well, sometimes I even feel that I'm more in hospitality than into banking. You are there when it comes to customer dealings often when you need to cut the ribbon, when there's a closing dinner, or just at the beginning, and then somewhere in between, actually the most important and sometimes also difficult part. I have incredibly capable people who are doing that together with the customer. But there is indeed, there's an element of being a figurehead, being in the region. We have a lot of visitors also coming from the UK, coming from other parts of the world, who I connect actually with interesting people for them also to get to know. So there's quite a bit of role to play when it comes to these sort of ceremonial things, but also making sure that I represent the bank in the right way. I also position people from the wider group into continental Europe. And it's actually something I really like. It's a nice addition to my role.
Yeah, you're very calm about the change in the role, but still would say it's still quite a lot of responsibility, a lot of people. So yeah, it's great. When you started your career, it was at PwC. Why did you start there, and was that a plan or did it just happen?
Yeah, well, it's a good question in the sense that is it a plan or was it more an intuitive feel? And sometimes I jokingly say, when people refer to me as, well, you started your career as a tax consultant, and I say, well, nobody's perfect. But the reason how I ended up there is that, well, I studied in Groningen, as you refer to. I studied economics, and I moved into fiscal economics. I actually quite enjoyed it. I was selected for a specific sort of internship. I liked it. That was at PwC. I particularly liked the people with whom I was working. So I decided to also take a permanent role there. And in the back of my mind, I always knew that this is probably not for the rest of my life.
Why was that?
Because it's quite a niche thing. It's quite a technical specialist thing. It's a very intellectually challenging practice, which I actually liked. So it really formed me as a professional. It really, sort of gave me more like analytical thinking power by having been there for a couple of years. But I also knew that one day I will probably want to broaden myself. I want to have, an area which is focused a little bit more than just on tax. And that's also why after having done a full-time MBA, I decided to, embark on my journey into banking.
Yeah, how did that come about? What was the trigger, or was it at some point the plan? I'm going to work at a bank, or how did that happen?
Well, so in 2001, I moved to Barcelona. I did my 2-year MBA there, and I would say 80-90% of people who do an MBA. They either end up as a strategy consultant or they go into banking. And this was years way before the financial crisis. Being a banker was also like, that was sort of the holy grail. But given my work experience at PwC, where I focused on M&A, and I was often like just one little radar in an M&A trajectory. But I very much felt, having also worked with bankers back then, well, that's probably something which probably would also fulfill my intellectual curiosity, to be a little bit more involved also in different elements of, dealing with customers. So I got recruited by Citigroup from campus, spoke with a lot of other banks, but ultimately I decided to join Citigroup. These were my first steps into banking, London, later New York, and I very much liked it. I very much loved it, actually, and well, I've never regretted joining the financial industry.
What was work like in, being a Dutchman, but then working in financial services in London and in the US, both places that have very different working ethic, I would say, than what you're, probably encounter here in the Netherlands? I mean, I'm not saying people are not working hard. Some do, absolutely. But obviously, I think you would agree that London and New York are different, different environments to be in.
Yeah, and well, when it comes to hard working, actually, if I go back in my memory at PwC when I worked there, it's like I also had to work quite hard, or actually wanted to work quite hard. But maybe New York was sort of next level when it came to that. Maybe also because it were my first steps into banking. Things were new. I was changing the industry I was working in. I was also changing the country I was working in. And yes, I first was in London for a year, and then I moved to New York. So there were a lot of changes at the same time, actually. But what I've always enjoyed about working hard, and trust me, I also like my personal life. I like time off.
We come to that.
Yeah. But, in a way, you also learn so much, when you're putting in more hours, when you also get the exposure, to work on very interesting assignments. So I've always seen these years working hard as also a huge investment in myself, and also really a good way to develop myself and to start to own it. Yes, it was different, but also here there are a lot of commonalities between, whether you work in London or whether you work in New York or whether you work in Amsterdam.
Right. I'm trying to picture you in New York, right? What was your age approximately?
I was in my 30s, beginning of my 30s.
Living alone or with someone or in an apartment? Were you working 6-7 days a week, or were you partying a lot? Like, can you give me a bit more color of your life there? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I have a big smile on my face, and I was single back then. I've only met my wife, when I moved back to Amsterdam. But sometimes I still miss that New York life, and then my wife tells me, "Why do you miss that New York life? You don't love me. You don't love us. You regret that choice." No, I don't. But New York is, for me, I find it a phenomenal city, and I worked hard, but I also played hard. It's an incredible city, from a business perspective, but also from food, social, culture. I lived in the Village, which I consider to be like the best place in Manhattan. I had some really good friends there inside the organization, but also some friends from outside. I had some MBA friends there. I actually even had like a very good friend from high school who I ended up with in New York. So it was a really, really good time. But sometimes you get a calling and you decide to go back to your roots, which I did.
Yeah, what was it? What was the trigger? I wanted to ask you, why did you at some point leave New York for the Netherlands?
Yeah, so I have been living, 5-6 years abroad or so. I'm a family man. I felt that, my family also needed me. I think they were missing me. I was probably missing them as well, but maybe I was a little bit less vocal on that. It's really nice to live abroad. It gives you so many different perspectives. But I also felt a little bit, this is the time to actually go back before I really embark upon a journey where I will probably not come back anymore to Amsterdam. So I've been away, or I'm saying Amsterdam, but I just meant the Netherlands. I have been away for a long time, but not too long, not to come back anymore. So that was my sort of decisive factor to move back. Intuitively taken in a way, but something I never had regretted. You know, I embarked upon a new avenue, a new journey.
But it was not something that came along and you said, okay, this is a good opportunity. It was really a decision by you. I want to move back.
Yeah, there was as I said, there was a calling in me. I want to go back. So the organization that I was working for was incredibly facilitating me going back, and also giving opportunity there to work there. I decided to embark upon something else and joined ABN AMRO. But it indeed started with more personal motivation than a business motivation.
Talked a little bit about the hard work. What are other cultural differences you would say between working in financial services in, for example, the US, or for that matter, London versus the Netherlands?
Every culture is different from each other, and even within a country, if you go from one place to the other, people say, well, these folks there are completely different. So tribalism is something that easily sort of starts to erode. If you look at the differences between the UK and the Netherlands, well, the cliche thing is that, well, the Dutch are too honest to be polite, and the Brits are too polite to be honest. But in every cliche, there's also a little bit of truth. I think they're a bit more implicit. Sometimes the Dutch are a little bit more explicit, a little bit more direct.
Is that rude or direct?
Yeah, well, I've really learned over time that I think sometimes you take your own culture as the norm, and trust me, the Dutch culture is not the norm. It's not the norm. When I was at my MBA in a class of over 200 different people, 70 different nationalities, trust me, the Dutch are not the norm. Actually, we are an exception on how we deal with certain things, and there's a lot of good in that. But I think we also need to be humble that when it comes to our directness, when it comes to what we call honest, is perceived in most parts of the world as not the best way to interact, and actually not the best way to get the best out of people. I very much believe, and this is not like giving lip service, but I think that I'm a strong believer in diversity, because I think if you bring these cultures really together, but also when you're respectful towards each other, then you get the most out of it. So let me go back a little bit to your question, how different was working in London or in New York compared to Amsterdam. I think in a Dutch context, there's maybe a little bit more room when you are at the work floor for sort of social connectivity. Maybe it's a little bit less hierarchical in a Dutch context compared to the US. The hard working element is, well, that's perceived differently in the US than in the Netherlands. So I think these are, for me, sort of the most obvious things. But coming back again, it almost starts to become a theme, is I rather focus on the commonalities, because there are also a lot of things who are not much different from one country versus the other.
No, I agree. I've lived in the US and the UK, and all the things you mentioned, I agree with you. The other thing I would mention is that I met more people in the US and the UK versus the Netherlands that are what I would call hungry, that really want to put in the hours and really want to go for it, whether it be in financial services or an NGO or whatever it is. But it could also be because I was in London and in the big cities in the US. So that may be different from the rest of those countries as well, right?
That's a really good point, Jeroen. That's a really good point. And it's the hungerness. It's also a little bit what we see at schools here in the Netherlands. And although that is changing a little bit, but if I go back in my times, academics, well, when you were studying in the Netherlands, well, you didn't always study to get an A+. I've studied in Canada, Queen's University. I did my MBA. Well, getting a good score is something that people find incredibly important. And actually, I found that quite inspiring and quite motivating, because it's also a way to develop yourself. It's really to give your best and to become a better version of yourself. So, of course, if there's too much of the good, it becomes bad stuff. If a society becomes too competitive or too much comparing one towards the other, that can lead to bad stuff. But I think that striving for excellence is something that I found quite inspiring. And so thanks for bringing it up, Jeroen, because I sort of totally
I'm
overlooked
just adding
that.
something to your list, which I completely agree with. So that's great. And if we go back much longer time to the way you were brought up, are you willing to share a bit of adding some color to how you were brought up?
Yeah, with all pleasure. So I come from a family of 5, father, mother, and 2 siblings. So my parents got my older sister, who is 3 years older than I am, at a relatively young age, 22. My father has always been in academics. He's a professor in literature.
And he still is, apparently, right? Or...
Well, you never lose that title, and I think he's quite proud of that. But he got retired, so he's in his 70s. My mom was a banker, or she worked for a bank. She worked for ABN AMRO, so she worked for over 25 years in Leiden, the place where I grew up. As a mother of 3 children working, and we're talking about the 70s, which was quite unusual at that time. So that's my parents. I have an older sister. I have a younger brother. I always call him my younger brother, although he turned 50 last week. And the special thing, which I'm also incredibly proud of, he's adopted from Bangladesh. In a way, I always feel sort of blessed, privileged, to also having been exposed to that specific experience, which really was incredibly forming for me.
Wow, that's was it when your younger brother at the time, he was really young. Now he's not that young anymore, but still. How was it that he came in your family from outside? How old were you when he was started to be with your family?
Yeah, so this was in 1978. So I was 5. He was 3. So he was relatively old to be adopted from Bangladesh, and I can vividly remember that we got a call, literally, and it's still in my mind. We got a call. And apparently my parents had been on the waiting list for a long time. This was really their thing, that they wanted to have someone adopted from another part of the world, someone who they wanted to give sort of a future. So we got a call, and a couple of weeks later, we could pick him up from the airport. So he came with a lot of children from Bangladesh. In a KLM flight. So we were sitting in a lobby at Schiphol, and then all of a sudden we got a new little brother in our family, which was quite unique from so many different perspectives, but also from a perspective that you go to the airport by car with 4, you go back with 5, and you have a brother.
And how was it for the family? It was a huge change, or not? Was it just business as usual? There was a brother boom, as if there was a new kid born.
In a way, I think the latter, at least from my perspective. I was a young kid. I was 5 years old. What did I know about the world? But probably for my parents, I think it was a different experience than when they got my sister and myself, because that was a different sort of lead time. He came at a much older age. But from my perspective, and also I think also from my parents' perspective and from my sister and my brother's perspective, in a way that it went incredibly smoothly, which also says a little bit about his resilience, his flexibility. And I think it also says a lot about my parents, who also gave him the environment, the environment to feel loved and to feel supported.
Great. Have you ever been to Bangladesh with him?
No, I have not been to Bangladesh, but my parents and my brother, they did many years ago, with an organized trip of kids who were adopted from Bangladesh.
What was the atmosphere at your family? Your mom in banking, your dad in academia. Maybe that has nothing to do with the atmosphere in family life. Maybe it does. I don't know.
Yeah. So, well, I very much believe that your leadership story is also based upon your personal story. So I look back at a very pleasant youth, young parents, not only by age, but also by spirit and by mind. Very liberal, very progressive. Not so much authority. Maybe I would have benefited a little bit of a little bit more authority. A lot of sort of opportunities that were given to us, a lot of responsibilities, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed. So that was the sort of the setup in our family. My father was often at home because that's when you're in academics. You can also, now after COVID, everyone can work from home. But at that time, that was not so common. But my father, as a professor, you can also work quite a bit from home. So I have memories about my youth that actually my mom was leaving in the morning, but my father was still at home. And when I came back at elementary school for lunch, he was there. He was taking care of my sister, my brother, myself. So that's a really good memory. So in a way, a very modern family in the 70s.
You're listening to Leaders in Finance with Jeroen Broekema.
A few months ago, I started with someone I think you happen to know quite well, Dan Dorner, still at ABN AMRO in the board. I started the so-called the 5 unusual questions. These are the only questions I've given you before. I tested them with Dan, and it was actually, I enjoyed it a lot. So I kept doing it, and we're still with those 5 questions, which I'd love to ask to you now.
And I very much enjoyed that specific podcast, and
good.
I listened to that also because Dan is a very dear friend of mine, and it's always a pleasure to listen to him. So in a way, I got a little bit of a prep to these 5 questions.
That's good. Well, there is a part in that where Dan talks about bananas, and a lot of people have asked him since about the bananas. So if you haven't listened to it, be sure, make sure you hear about the bananas. Anyway, the first question in these 5 unusual questions is: do you have a somewhat unusual hobby or something special that you do in your free time?
I had the benefit of prepping a little bit for this, and it's not that I want to be special, but I also don't want to give these sort of the obvious answers. But in a way, I have a special thing, but it's not so unusual. But I really love sports, and maybe I took that a little bit to the next level. So I'm an avid runner, or I became an avid runner. I love marathons. I love my running. I love my daily run in the morning, which really became a habit.
Daily,
yeah. It's
seriously. That's quite unusual.
It is unusual. Maybe I got a little bit too much addicted to it. But it's my way to get going into the day. So around 7ish, put my trainers on. I go for a run. Never with music, sometimes with others. It's actually a really good way to have a chat. But for me, that gets me into the day, gives me clarity of mind. I can sort of have a little bit of a look back on the day, but also look forward on what's going to happen that specific day. So,
is that a few kilometers or something, or?
Well, it depends a bit. So sometimes I'm a bit like sort of time restricted. So this morning I went for a 7K run. Came back after 35 minutes or so. Then I'm a planner. I'm a planner, Jeroen. So forgive me, but I always make sure that when I'm home, at least I can spend a bit of time with my children and with my wife before they go to school. So I have an early rise, but I also make sure that I'm there for breakfast. I think that they prefer their social media over being with me at breakfast. But that's my sort of unusual thing. And in the weekend, I go for longer runs. And in the weekend, I always try to do that with friends because it's a really good way also to spend time together and to have a good chat, like a really good chat.
And this is all because you enjoy the run itself. But you said you also did marathons and stuff. Do you also then run for a certain time, or is it still just to run?
That's
be honest, please. Is there competition involved or not?
There is competition involved, but it's a competition with myself, where I really want to raise the bar. I want to beat my best time. It's something I like, but I also learned over time I dislike it more and more because that's not the purpose of doing that. Like preparing for a marathon is not just for the marathon. It's just a journey to make sure you have like brain capacity space to think. It's a way to keep fit. It's something to look forward to. So actually a couple of weeks ago, I decided to do something else, and I did a trail marathon in Noordwijk, which that's not something you do for time. It's also out of the 42 kilometers, like half of it was on the beach. It was high tide. Other half is like in the forest and on the dunes. So it's not about the time. It's pretty intense, but I really appreciated and enjoyed the experience, which I did with 3 other friends, which was
that's great.
Was really good.
Have you ever calculated how many kilometers you run on an annual basis? It must be quite a lot then.
Yeah, well, it easily goes over the 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah. You've ran a lot of official marathons then as well, like for example New York or London or Rotterdam or
all of them.
All of them. How many have you run then?
Well, at least all of them that you were referring to, but I've done now over 15.
Wow.
But I only started like 10 years ago, and I don't want to do more than 2 a year because it's not so healthy.
So your body can actually take it, run so much, and then still also do those marathons, and then have this family life, and then on top a very busy job.
Yeah, or maybe it is actually the way for success, or the way to stay healthy.
I should go back to my 5 unusual, otherwise I will never make it. But this was just really interesting in this because I love running myself as well. So that's great to hear. Second one, is there a famous person? So you're not allowed to say my dad or mom or brother or sister, whatever. Is there a famous person you admire or see as a great inspiration?
Yeah, well, here I go back to sports again, and it's Roger Federer, and probably someone picked by many others. But from my perspective, for a couple of different reasons. And I was an avid tennis player when I was young, actually. From the age of 10 till 16, 17, I played tennis every single day. And also at a competitive level. And I always knew I would never become like a professional tennis player, but it was truly my passion. So it's something I've continued to follow throughout the years. But Roger Federer, a part of being incredibly talented, gifted, he's such a pleasant person. How he looks at competition, for example, his competitors, they're his friends. For him, it's a source of inspiration. The guy is incredibly eloquent. Have you ever seen after a match winning Wimbledon, or I can recall like the Australian Open that he won, giving the speech, showing his emotions, actually becoming very emotional. I like that. And then he's also incredibly successful on the business front. He's supported by a great team. He places a lot of trust and faith also in his wife, an incredibly strong woman. So the way how he approaches things, and I would recommend everyone to listen to a speech that he gave at Dartmouth. It's like one of these Ivy League schools in the US, where he got like sort of a special lectureship. I think it's called a commencement speech that he gave. It's incredibly inspiring. And the guy is, as I said, he's eloquent, he's smart.
And do you also have something, you probably have more in common, but something that, I think of is he's very disciplined as well. And apparently you are as well, right? You're able to run every day. You said you structure your day, or control how you organize things. So is that something you have in common? Is it also something you kind of see in him and see in yourself?
Well, in no way I want to compare myself with Roger Federer, because one of the other things I very much like in him, he's incredibly humble. So I think it would not be humble for me to
you're
look
humble as well,
yeah,
I would say.
to look at myself of being like a Roger Federer. But you're right that I think part of being successful is also being disciplined and habitizing certain things, like really habitizing certain things, which often also makes it much easier to keep yourself honest. When things become a habit, it's so much embedded in your day-to-day, in your behavior. And
does that come natural to you, or do you really decide this has to become a habit? So I'm trying to do it 7 or 10 times, and then it's habitized, as you say.
Maybe a bit of both, but I think it's probably also a little bit in my personality that I don't know whether it's disciplined, but I would say it's more like I can be quite focused and determined on what I want to achieve, or what I want to do, or who I want to be. So I think it's coming from focus. And trust me, I'm not disciplined on everything, but if I find something important, I find it relatively easy to bring up the discipline and the focus.
Third so-called unusual question is, what has been the scariest moment in your life?
There's not a specific thing or situation. I've never been in a situation where I had to fear for my life in the sense that I was in a car accident or I was almost in a plane crash or ended up in a big fight. So it's not that I have like a really scary moment. Obviously, sometimes you're a bit tensed, you're a bit anxious. Your vulnerability is often in your children. That's what I've learned as a parent. Probably most parents can relate to that. That's where your vulnerability is. That's probably also where my in a way, and I don't want to be driven by fear, and I'm not driven by fear. It's also not how I've been brought up. But if there's something that could scare me, that could make me a bit anxious, stressed, it's often in your children, because you really want to, wish that they're happy, healthy. So that I think if I think about fear, it's not even so much for myself. It's more in the ones that I really love.
I expected actually that you would talk about your health, and I will cut this out if you don't want to talk about it. But you told me in a prep conversation we had that you also had significant health issues relatively recently. But again, if you don't want to talk about it, then we don't. But I kind of expected you would say, this has been the scariest moment in my life.
Yeah, and I'm okay to talk about it. Although when I was going through that, which is now almost 2 years ago, I was little bit sort of private around it. Not because I didn't want to share, but I also experienced that was an incredibly intense period. It was an intense period for myself. It was a very intense period for my family and the wider family. So not only my wife, my children, but also my parents, my brother, my sister. And then you also have like a very group of inner circle friends. So it was incredibly impactful, and I wanted to actually manage that a little bit. And it was indeed an intense period, but I've never been in fear. And maybe that's also, and in a way that surprised me. It surprised me in the sense because you never know when you are confronted with a severe situation. Also, this was a severe health situation, how you react. But fear was not something that came to my mind. Actually, what immediately came to my mind when I got diagnosed, when I knew what kind of treatment I had to go through, there was this, what you call discipline, but I would say like incredibly determined and focused. This is what I have to go through. These are probably the things that are going to help me, and these things are not going to help me. So I'm also not going to focus on it. So fear was clearly not there. But I've been blessed that was not there, because I can totally relate to people who would be incredibly fearful going through such a situation. But I had the luck that apparently that's not part of my DNA or my personality, that I feel that.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a kind of also a way to cope with it, to immediately start planning and making sure that the things you could actually impact, and there was a big chunk you couldn't impact, but the things that you could impact, you tried to make the best of it.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a correct summary.
No, but it is. Jeroen, you're not only an interviewer, you're also a psychologist. I found out, because the controlling element is indeed that's correct. So often with things that we cannot control, it can make us feel a little bit helpless, or actually also a little bit fearful. And yes, what I could control, I wanted to control, but the controlling element very much went to, how can I get prepared? How can I make sure that I'm engaged? But when you're prepared and engaged, I think then you need to let go, and you need to let go to the experts, to the doctors, to the treatment, who make sure that you also become healthy. So, and that very much helped me throughout that whole process. The things that you can control, focus on it, and the things that are beyond your control, let it to others.
Thanks for sharing. Fourth question is, suppose you receive 200 million euros today and you must spend it within a few weeks or a month. What would you do with it? And preferably indicate as specifically as possible how you would spend it.
I heard that question like in previous sessions. I think there are a lot of good causes to spend that money on. My intuitive feel is I would do something with education. I would actually also do something with where the world is today, with some really dreadful situations.
Make that more specific.
Yeah, but and let me make it more specific, because what I would do, and this is also a little bit from personal experience, I feel incredibly strongly that everyone deserves a home. And what do I mean with that? I think we are living in a society where we should not, accept that there are homeless people. I've seen that in my very sort of inner circle, someone who became homeless, often not driven so much by monetary issues, but also often by psychiatric situation. And I've also have experience with specific organizations who really help homeless people, to afford a home, to build the sort of infrastructure, to also make sure that you can continue to live there, that you get support from all different angles. I do know that there is also within the different municipalities in the Netherlands that they're really trying to get less people homeless, less people on the street, because it's a vicious circle. It's actually also from a money perspective, it's better to arrange for housing, because the impact on societies is also quite big. But I would say the impact on humanity is even bigger. So I would spend that 200 million, within a month on some of these organizations who I have seen doing an incredibly good job. And I think they need the financial support to make sure that, and let's start with the Netherlands, that there are no homeless people in the Netherlands.
Great. I love it. Last out of these 5 unusual, if you could reverse one decision from the past, what would it be?
There are a lot of small decisions that I may have regretted. For a long time, I have regretted, going back from New York to Amsterdam, till I met my wife, actually. And then I sort of really felt coming home. And the cliche answer to this would have been, or could have been, you often regret the things that you have not done. But often it is that you regret what you have not done. And sometimes you also don't know what you miss out on if you would not have embarked on a specific avenue. And some of the decisions that I took, so also going back from New York to Amsterdam, it brought me so much good. I really loved life from a personal perspective, also from a professional perspective. I feel incredibly blessed by all the opportunities I got through my employers, but also some of the other decisive things in life, whether it was my time in Groningen, studying there, or my time in Barcelona at IESE. They have been forming for me as a person, and it gave me so much joy in life, but also it sort of, embarked me on a specific journey, which I probably would never have been embarking upon if I would not have taken that specific decision.
So the short summary of this answer is that there's not something you would have reversed if you had the opportunity.
No, actually not.
It still helps to get a view on who you are, so that's good. We also always have a pleaser and a teaser, and I start with that right away. So on the teasing side, it always has to do more with the business and with financial services. We have written down that even though the EU, and specifically EU, not Europe, but the EU has strong banks, it will never get as strong financial center as, for example, London or New York. Do you agree with that?
And then, if you say the EU, you mean like continent, like really the EU,
the European Union,
without the UK.
Without the UK.
Well, a lot of people thought after Brexit, well, this is the end of London. It clearly isn't. It clearly isn't. And some people actually, they argue that London is a bigger financial center than New York is. And in a way, you can make that argument. You can build that argument. So I am with you that I don't see that there is a real competitor coming from the continent towards London or New York. Although, if you look at who is sort of the winner from a continental perspective, it's clearly Paris. I really had a hope that Amsterdam would, be the winner.
Yeah, why is it not Amsterdam or Frankfurt?
Yeah, you can have like quite a lengthy debate on this. And actually I'm part of the board of the Foreign Banking Association. We have spent quite some time with policymakers and politicians in The Hague. I think where we have missed out a little bit as the Netherlands, that historically we had been seen as a country, as a source of goods, as a source of, head offices being actually moved from other places in the world to the Netherlands. I think maybe we have been a little bit less commercial. Maybe we've been losing out a little bit on the edge that we are having as the Netherlands. Maybe a little bit.
The business climate or the fiscal, the tax climate.
All of the above, but it's also the welcoming part. So after Brexit, but also very recently, if you see what other countries are doing to make sure that business is coming their way and that they're creating also a USP for a specific sector or for a specific industry or a specific company, I think we have been less ambitious in the Netherlands and less welcoming a little bit.
Does it have to do with the political leadership that is not specifically focused on this? Because when I lived in the UK, one of the things I experienced is that there's a lot of players in government working quite closely. It can be good, can be bad. I mean, it's up to you to up to everyone to decide. But working quite closely together to actually attract business from other countries.
Yeah, maybe we became a little bit complacent as the Netherlands, losing out a little bit on the marketing that you need to do. You also need to be appealing. You need to be attractive. You need to, sometimes you also need to make tailor-made things. And I think the Netherlands, what we have done, well, slightly wrongly, I would say, is we've also not been so consistent in our policies, changing that overnight or changing that depending on the administration that was in power. And consistency is incredibly important. So coming back to your question, why not Frankfurt? Why not Amsterdam? I think Paris did a really good job. And we have quite a big office in Paris. The commercial nucleus of the European franchise is in Paris. There's a big talent pool. There are a lot of other banks there. I've seen Paris becoming more and more international over the years.
So they could ultimately compete with the size and the depth of the London market?
That's probably still a way to go. But France in itself, I believe it's the second largest economy of Europe. It's a big city. It's a city that is pretty appealing to a lot of people. So from the continent, from the EU perspective, it's clearly Paris, I would say. But there's still some catch up to play to be in the same league as London or New York.
You're quite well positioned then between London and continental Europe. So it's actually a great position to be in. And on the policing side, it has always been the same question for 175 interviews or something along that number, which is, do you have a particular book that has inspired you, or particular books, could also be plural? And also, do you like to read? Because that should be maybe the first question.
Yeah, well, this is one of my my other passions. Is I love to read, but with my
Your
father,
dad was professor of literature.
Yeah,
said, right?
so there was also no way that we would not be reading. But for me, and particularly non-fiction, so novels, romans, as we say in Dutch, that's something I love. I always try to follow, what's new, what's good, what is like sort of well reviewed. Obviously get a lot of inspiration through my father, but also particularly my sister. She's very sort of still involved in that. So for me, it's really difficult to choose one specific book. But if I were to choose one specific book, and I think it's also quite an actual thing these days, I read a couple of years ago a book called Upper Yangon. It's written by a ghostwriter, actually. And it's about a Palestinian man and an Israeli man who both lost a daughter in the incidents that had been happening over the decades in Israel. They should have been each other enemies, but they became friends, actually best friends. It's a story about empathy, compassion, healing, sorrow, seeing each other's perspective.
What was the title again?
Aparaigon. And it's an incredibly difficult name. I had to look it up when I read it. And aparaigon, it's coming from geometry. And it's actually a shape with a countless infinite number of sides. And I think that also captures it all. It shows that, on everything in life, there are so many different perspectives. There are so many different sides. It's so easy to put the world in black and white. You're right, you're wrong. But often there is so much more to it. And I think these two gentlemen, you can also look it up at YouTube.
Are they? You think it's real and they have written it, but it's just because
no,
it's
reasons.
Real.
It's all real.
But
it's
you
all
said
real.
It's a ghostwriter.
Ghostwriter, yeah. So the ghostwriter wrote a book about it, and it's a bit of a hybrid book in the sense that it is not purely facts and it's not purely non-fiction. These two gentlemen, they're real people. You can look it up at YouTube. They're also giving speeches together. They're really, really good friends.
Wow.
And they've been dealing with, I would say, like the biggest pain that a father can ever experience, which is losing one of their children. But for them, they saw that instead of ending up in a life where you're full of revenge and hate, they turned it into something positive. And I think, particularly in the times that we are living in today, this is so incredibly important.
No, absolutely. And yeah, it cannot be more relevant now than ever, right?
It cannot be more relevant than now. And so I read this book when I was actually on holiday on Mallorca, I think it was 4 years ago. It was actually recommended by my sister. She's always the sort of best recommender of books that I have to read. And I found it incredibly insightful, but also very emotional at times. And it's as you say, Jeroen, it's so relevant at these times. Try to understand each other's perspective.
Has clearly been a theme during this conversation that you, instead of burning bridges between cultures, you try to, find commonalities, right? That's really important part. Seemed to be, we only got to know each other now, but seems to be an important part of your life, to making sure that you find this common ground.
Yes, and well, it doesn't mean that I do not have opinions, and I can be firm at times. And well, sometimes I'm also
we should ask your kids if you're always so diplomatic.
I'm not always diplomatic, trust me. And I can have, as said, strong opinions. I can sometimes jump to conclusions too quickly. I can be very sort of impatient. But I think my default is that I really try to understand someone else. And I think it also, what I like about it is that it also gives me really new insights. It's like I like this 360 view on things, on people, on situations, on businesses, because I also feel that it gives me more insight and a competitive advantage compared to people who are not doing that. So also when you want to position yourself, your institution, a little bit ahead of someone else, I think that's 360 view is actually quite a powerful thing.
Before we wrap up, is there something you would say that we should really have covered during this conversation and we haven't so far?
Well, I think I think we covered a lot in an hour. I also like it that I had the opportunity to share something about my personal life. I hope I have not been oversharing. I don't think I've been oversharing. But I thank you very much for this interview. I enjoyed it. I hope others will enjoy it as well.
I'm sure they will. And the first listener, which is talking right now, really enjoyed it. It was really good. It was, thanks a lot for also being vulnerable and showing the person behind the success, as we tend to say, is one of the reasons why we started this podcast. It's really to show that C-level in financial services are just as normal people as everyone else. So thanks a lot for taking the time to speak to leaders in finance, to speak to me. We have a small present for you, which I will give you afterwards. And for now, thank you so much for taking the time, Vincent.
Thank you, Jeroen. Pleasure.
You've been listening to Leaders in Finance. We hope you've enjoyed the episode and would love to hear from you. What's on your mind? Who would you like to hear next? Tell us in an Apple or Google review via email or our social media channels. We'd greatly appreciate it. Finally, we'd like to thank our partners for their ongoing support. They are Kayak, EY, MeDirect and Roland Berger. Thank you for listening.